Let's have a prayer. We'll get started. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this gathering of friends and a time to read your word. I pray that you speak to us in new ways and let us hear you. I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So the series this semester, we've got one more of these before we take a break for the winter. And this series has been how to read the Bible, how to read Paul, how to read the prophets, right? How to make sense of it. And so this morning I want to talk about a theme in the Gospels called the Messianic secret, which is something that you really need to know in order to understand the drama of the story of Jesus. Life, death, resurrection, all this is caught up in something called a secret. And I want to talk about that secret this morning so that you'll not only maybe learn a few new stories, but also put the Gospels into context. So if you've got a Bible in your lap, I want you to turn with me to Mark chapter 1, verse 40. And it's page 813, page 813. So Mark 1, verse 40. Before I read this to you, I want to explain a little bit about biblical geography and where these stories take place. So it might surprise you, although some of you have either been with me or been to the Birmingham Interfaith trip, but it's always a surprise when you go there to learn how much of the Bible happened in such a small surface area. So the Sea of Galilee on this map is up the Jordan River. So Jerusalem would be about right, let's see, here's the Dead Sea. Jericho's right here. Jerusalem's about right here. And you just go north. This is what we now call the disputed West Bank in the newspapers. Okay, this is this area right here, also called Samaria in biblical times. This is the Jezreel Valley. A lot of stuff happens in the Jezreel Valley. This is the breadbasket of Israel. This is the Sea of Galilee. And most of the stories happen in a 10-mile arc on the northwest shore of the lake. That little bitty postage stamp lake, right? The Hebrews have so little water in this part of the world. It's an issue today. In Israel, when they're not having to fight wars on their borders, they spend a lot of time and a lot of on technology to desalinate seawater or to use sewage for irrigation. And they spend a lot of time thinking about water because they don't have any. So the ancient Hebrew language didn't have a word for lake, only sea. But the Sea of Galilee surface area is the same surface area as Lake Martin. I mean, it's the same. Someone from Alabama Power actually looked that up, so that's like data. But it's about 11 miles long and 7 miles wide, and it's a sea, right? Well, it's not really a sea. And so most of the Gospels take place just right here on the northwest shore of the lake, which means that everybody knows everybody's business. And that's going to be a key factor in the Messianic secret. Everybody knows everybody. A good way to sort of appreciate the drama of the gospel, let's put this into an image we can all understand. Imagine a country church. I'm thinking of one right now on the way to Lake Martin, down by Real Island, a little red brick Baptist church with Decoration Day, and maybe it's called New Bethlehem or something, and it's just got a little bitty sign out front. And so the preacher there is probably a farmer or a local electrician or something, a plumber, somebody who is grown up, in equality, that sort of thing, and preaches there. Now, imagine on that Sunday if Billy Graham showed up and took up residence and started preaching, right? Billy Graham, like the greatest orator, ever, and suddenly the whole town of equality is going crazy because they finally got hearing some really good preaching that they had to turn on the radio to hear, right? But this is exactly what happens when Jesus lands in this little world on the northwest shore of the lake. Jesus is from Galilee. Now, Galilee is actually a region, and look at this map. Galilee starts when Samaria ends. So it ends right here at the Jezreel Valley. This is Samaria. Everything on the other side of the Jezreel Valley, north to Mount Hermon, which is up here, is all the Galilee. So this is called the Lower Galilee, the Sea of Galilee, and then the mountains of the Upper Galilee. So Galilee can mean a bigger spot than just the Sea of Galilee as well. Nazareth is in Lower Galilee, and so Nazareth would be, it overlooks the Jezreel Valley. It would be about right here. So everything is close, right? Jesus grew up looking down in the Jezreel Valley, where a lot of Bible stories happen, which is also going to have something to do with the Messianic secret. But let me just read a passage to you, and then we'll see if we can start to see right away. So Mark chapter 1, verse 40. A leper came to Jesus begging him and kneeling. He said to him, "If you choose, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, "I do choose. Be made clean." And immediately the leprosy left him and he was made clean. And after sternly warning him, he sent him away at once, saying, "See that you say nothing to anyone." That's the Messianic secret. But let me keep going. "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer your cleansing, what Moses commanded, as a testimony to them." But he went out and began to proclaim it freely and to spread the word so that Jesus could no longer go into a town openly, but stayed out in the country, and people came to him from every quarter. Of course he did. He blabbed his mouth, right? Well, you're not going to believe what Jesus did for me. And Jesus told him not to tell anybody, and he told the whole county, and so Jesus can't go anywhere. So that's one reason why I think Jesus wanted to keep his identity a secret, is that he needed a minute's peace. Everybody wanted something from him. But the bigger issue is I think they wanted it for the wrong way or the wrong reason, right? Tell no one. So let's think this out for a second. Why would Jesus not want anybody to know who he is? Any thought? Anybody want to just hazard a guess? Why would Sandy? Why would not anybody? Why would Jesus want to keep it a secret? Yes, and so for streaming purposes, I'm going to answer that they might make him something in their image, a ruler that they wanted. How about this one? They're living in first century Rome, and that's pretty sad. I used to grow up thinking that living under the boot of Rome meant that a plumed soldier, a centurion, would bang on your door in the middle of the night, take you away or something like that. Psh, Rome was past all that in the first century. They just taxed everything. They had to pay for this standing army that was sitting near you, and they didn't have any civil services. They just had an army to come burn down your village if you tried to revolt. But other than that, you just paid taxes, and you paid taxes, and you paid taxes, and you paid taxes. So can you imagine poor folks living in the Galilee? For instance, Jesus' own family. Joseph was a carpenter, but that word means tekton. It means laborer. They had no land, so they're poor. They're off their land. Their ancestral religion is all about farming, and they can't farm because absentee landlords now from other places own everything and tax everything. And now suddenly you've got a guy. Not only is he Billy Graham at the New Bethlehem Baptist Church, but he can also do stuff like heal leprosy or feed. How about feed 5,000 people with a few crumbs of bread? You could feed an army with that, right? Or how about raise the dead? He raised a little girl from the dead in the Galilee. He said, "Talitha kum," little girl, get up. She got up from the dead. No, this is a general who could end this nightmare. This is someone they could rally behind and could fight for them. This is why Jesus can't tell anybody who he really is, which makes a really dramatic backstory. I should say cool backstory. It's a dramatic backstory that Jesus is really the loneliest guy in the world the whole time, just the loneliest guy. And there's this really poignant scene. I want you to ask me a question.
Could he have intentionally known that this man was going to spread the word?
The question was, could Jesus have known? You know why he would have known that the guy was going to spread the word? Because Jesus is from the Galilee too, and that's all they do is talk. Exactly. Of course he is. Jesus is a both and, not an either or. He's fully human and he's fully divine. He knows how this is going to play. I think Jesus all the while knew how the whole story was going to work out because he knows human nature. The cross hanging behind me, the curtain's closed, but the cross behind that curtain is the worst that we do and the best that God does. And he knows this. Love always hurts. Love always buys trouble, right? And of course he knew that guy would spill the beans. So Jesus has to run. He has to run from village to village. He has to be careful how he presents himself so that they don't, drag him off and make him into some sort of royalty. I will say this is another nature of the Galilee, is that it's different up there. So this region here is different than Jerusalem down here. Jerusalem down here has the Temple Mount and has clergy. It's a very politicized and generational kind of religion. They know how they do it. They know how they like it. Once a year, you travel down there and you pay a temple tax. That's another tax that you would pay, and then you would also pay for the sacrifices. You do it once a year for the entirety of your life. But it was an institution that had to be respected. The Galilee was known for rebels. I did a podcast years ago where I said Jesus is from Alabama. It's very populist, storytelling culture. The best soldiers, even today in Israel, the best soldiers in the IDF come from the kibbutzim, and a lot of those are in the Galilee. They're just proud. They're proudly patriotic, and they're cowboys. Jesus is from that culture. The story that I love to tell, if you want to know about the Galilee, and again why he has to keep it a secret. Years ago, like so many years ago, back in the day when I used to take a sport coat to Israel because I wanted to wear a jacket in Jerusalem. Very casual country. Don't do that unless you just want to. I still wear a coat on the plane. That's just what I do. So I had a sport coat, but I left it. I left it in the kibbutz, and I said to Don, I said, Don, I left my Navy blazer. I said, FedEx that thing down to Jerusalem so I have it when I get down there. And Don said, oh, Rev, that's way too expensive. I know a guy. This is the Galilean way. A guy knows a guy. Everybody knows a guy in the Galilee. I know a guy. So I got that jacket the night before I flew home. Never saw it. And when I finally got it, it was in a little big plastic bag, and it smelled like gasoline. So, it's just so some guy had a guy who had a guy who had a guy in a truck. So this is their world, right? And it's they don't like city people, right? They're country people, and it's an oral tradition. So many of the stories that Jesus would tell are Galilean stories. I'll paraphrase a famous parable. We read parables of Jesus, and we think that all the Bible is holy and the same, and we don't realize that some of it's meant to be funny. Jesus said, one day a man owed a king $1 billion. See, in the Bible it says 10,000 talents, but it's really, that's $1 billion. He owed him $1 billion. Well, already Jesus' friends are laughing because this is just some yahoo that got into debt for $1 billion. Boy, he's got trouble coming, right? And then the king forgives it, and now they're rolling. Okay, no king forgives $1 billion debt. It just doesn't happen. And then the guy sees somebody on the road who owes him $200. He says, pay me the 200, and he shakes him down. By now, I promise you, James and John from Zebedee, from Galilee, they think this is the funniest story they've ever heard in their life. And because the guy was unforgiving, the king threw that unforgiving servant into a torture chamber until he could pay the debt. Now, what that means is that God's grace is beyond us, right? It's wild, it's free, it's generative. God expects, if we have received grace, we're supposed to show grace. But they did this with a storytelling culture. But now we need to talk about the secrets. I want you to turn with me to Mark chapter 8. Mark chapter 8, verse 27. So this scene takes place north of the Sea of Galilee, up here at the foothills of this big mountain right here called Mount Hermon. It takes place here, and I've got a picture that I want to show you. Coming up out of a field, about 3 kilometers from the Lebanese border and at the foot of Mount Hermon, is this altar. Now, this is on the road to Damascus. So St. Paul would have seen this altar, and Jesus and his friends in this scene are walking to Caesarea Philippi, and they would have seen this altar. I've never taken a group to this altar because you've got to hike about 3 miles over farmland, and it's just kind of hard to get to it. But it's called Tel Amrit, and it is an altar built to deify the Emperor Augustus. It reminds me of Shelley's poem Ozymandias, the trunks of the legs out in the middle of the field. So this altar just kind of comes up out of the grass, and it's there to honor Caesar Augustus, the emperor of the world, as divine. The irony here is that it was paid for by Herod, king of the Jews, who was a client king, and he kind of knew where his bread was buttered. So Jesus and his friends are walking in the shadow of this thing, and Jesus asks his friends a question. Let me read it. Quit spitting this out. Okay, Mark chapter 8, verse 27, 8:20. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. Where are you looking right there? And on the way, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" They answered him, "John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others one of the prophets." Now, I'll stop right here for a second. Why would people think that he was Elijah? So the Gospel of Mark is unique in that of the 4 Gospels, it begins differently. It begins with John the Baptist. The Gospel of John starts in outer space, and then Matthew and Luke start with Christmas. John starts with John the Baptist. Well, the reason for this is because it had been 400 years since Malachi predicted that John the Baptist would return. And so when John appears baptizing at the Jordan River, we'll go back to my map for a second, which would have been down here by Jericho, baptizing down here in this hole, people were going way down. Okay, this is 4,000 feet from Jerusalem down into this hole to hear John preach. The reason why is because he looked like Elijah and he sounded like Elijah. And so it seemed to people that God would be talking again. God was talking again. And so people were getting pretty excited about the possibility. Not only is Jesus perhaps a general who can throw the Romans out of our land, but what if it's something else? What if the prophecies have come true? What if he's the Messiah? Some are beginning to whisper. A lot of the stories of Jesus take place in the Galilee, but some take place down here in the Jezreel Valley. And one of these takes place about right here down in that hole. This is at the base of something called Mount Gilboa. And it's a town called Nain, and it's still there. And in Luke's gospel, we remember that a dead boy was coming out of a funeral procession on the bier, and Jesus raises the child, and their response is, a prophet has risen among us. Now, that doesn't mean that they have an incomplete idea of who Jesus is. Oh, the poor Hebrews, they just think he's a prophet. No. What they're saying is that Elijah's back, because Elijah and Elisha both performed the same miracles in the same place 800 years before. So recently, so some of you who come to a men's Bible study and then the women's later, I'm kind of doing an Elijah-Elisha movie with y'all, okay, in tandem. And one of the things I'm learning is that okay, right here where John the Baptist baptized Jesus and where the crowds followed him, Joshua led the people into the promised land right there at Jericho. Wait, and also Elijah crossed the Jordan River right there when he was taken up into heaven into a whirlwind. And what I'm beginning to appreciate in my time spent with the land is that Bible stories tend to repeat over and over and over and over and in the same place. So best you believe that the people of Galilee were thinking, oh wow, do we have Elijah or Elisha in our midst now? You know, are one of the prophets come back? Because they know that they knew those stories and they knew where they happened. Well, let's keep reading. Jesus asked them, but who do you say that I am? And Peter answered him, you are the Messiah. Can you imagine how his heart must have leapt with joy that somebody gets it? He's been carrying this burden. And part of the burden would be, I want to expand on something that Sandy said, you know, making a ruler in your own image. Jesus didn't come to perform parlor tricks. He just didn't. At the Thanksgiving Eucharist, I remembered this question that a friend of mine asked me one time. It's one of my all-time favorites, and it kind of makes the point. If somebody handed Jesus a guitar, could he play it? This is the kind of stuff I get asked all the time, right? And usually when I'm kind of not ready for a good answer, if someone handed Jesus a guitar, could he play it? Well, what that question presumes is that did Jesus do all this stuff to prove his existence? Believe in me, here, poof. I remember an NBC movie years ago about the boyhood of Jesus, which we know very little about, only Luke really tells us. But this was like Jesus, the missing years. It was like a Christmas special. And, you know, the little 12-year-old, 13-year-old Jesus sees a little dead sparrow and picks it up and flies off, you know, that kind of thing. And he's just kind of just performing miracles everywhere. You know, those kinds of fanciful tales presume that Jesus just does all this so we'd believe he's real. What the Bible teaches is that life happens when we're close to God. That's what happens. Provision happens when we're close to God. Life happens when we're close to God. When we're walking in God's steps and we're under the cover and we're staying really close to our Maker, good things happen for us. Hope, joy, right? Strength, confidence, clarity, peace, dried tears. I mean, whatever those things that we need, those are the gifts of God for the people of God. And those aren't there for God to say, believe in me, or I'll make you feel better if you believe in me. No. Those things happen when we return to God. That happens there. So what's happening around Jesus is all this stuff is happening because this is what God does. You know, God heals, God feeds, God gives hope. And so just right there in that moment, can you imagine Jesus going, wow, Peter, you really are the rock. You the man, okay? He said it. But then he said, don't tell anybody else about this because they don't know yet, right? They're going to think it's a Galilean thing versus a Jerusalem thing. These two regions don't like each other. They would love to have a rebel leader to come down here and kick those rich priests that live in that gated community. You know, that's part of the drama of John the Baptist as well. John the Baptist belonged to the elites. Jesus is from Nazareth. And for Mary, his mother, to have a cousin from this part of the world, the nice gated communities of Jerusalem with a priestly family, means that something happened to Mary. People living in the Galilee had a little bit of an attitude because they're poor and they're mad, right? Could be a populist movement. For all these reasons, Jesus is like, I didn't come to do that, right? I didn't come to do that's politics. I came to save. So he tells them, don't tell anybody about me. So let's keep reading. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, those guys in Jerusalem, the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. That's the plan. He said all this quite openly. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. And if you read the Gospel of Mark as a whole, that word rebuke is what Jesus does to demons. That's the word he uses for demons. It's pretty presumptuous of Peter to, but he's comfortable. I mean, they're pals and they've been hanging around, so he rebukes Jesus. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you're setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Okay, what are human things? Politics, power, taxes, Romans, aches and pains, I mean, whatever those things are, you're not setting your mind on the plan. What's the plan? Salvation, eternity, hope, generativity of God. I mean, a quiet courage. What do we need right now? Because those are what God wants for us, not merely to have our particular side assuaged or to make us feel good, right? Isn't it interesting? I really don't want to go down this rabbit trail too much, but when we were little, government didn't make us happy or unhappy. It just was, right? And we tend to fight over human things now, and perhaps the best thing we can do as a church is get back under the cover of God's protection and set our minds on divine things. One divine thing that we did, and I'm very proud of, is this month of November, we made up a game. All of our breakfast sales would go to feed the hungry. If you heard the announcement at 9, I'll make it at 11. We gave away over $100,000 to food-related ministries in our community. $100,000. That's a lot of biscuits. Okay, now that is, I believe, setting our mind on divine things and not on human things. The church that we partnered with, we fed 1,400 families one Saturday morning. New Rising Star Missionary Baptist Church. I baptize babies. They baptize adult believers. Do we care that morning how we baptize our people? Do we really care, or did 1,400 families need food? That's setting your mind on divine things and not on human things. But that just came to me. Okay, I'll stop before I go any too far with any of that. However, there is a place in the Bible where Jesus says who he is quite openly and asks someone to share, and it happens back at the lake. So this is, I love this map, but it's probably not a great Sea of Galilee map. This is the Jewish side of the lake. And the reason why you know it's the Jewish side is because there are no pig bones in the archaeology, no swine, not at all. So you know that they're kosher eating Hebrew people. Now down here in Jerusalem, which is right here, only Jews. So they have no Gentile neighbors, Greek-speaking Gentile neighbors to fool with. They don't have to rub up against them. They don't have to think about them. They don't have to do anything. It's monolithically Jewish. But up in the Galilee, you got neighbors. So you got to be really, really careful with your neighbors. Years ago, I had an opportunity to fish on the Sea of Galilee, and it was really kind of one of the coolest things I've ever done, because we got in a fight with another boat that dropped their net in this guy's turf. I mean, I just sort of held the boat while he fought, but it was still pretty neat. And so my reflection on that was that Don said, well, yeah, fishing is fighting business. Peter, James, and John, those guys fought every day. Can you imagine fighting a Greek-speaking Gentile boat while you're out there protecting your turf in the net? So Gentiles lived on this side of the lake, which is the eastern side of the lake, and we know that because of pig bones. This is a spot where it is believed that swine rushed headlong into the sea, and that is the very spot because it is the high place at the base of the tombs where this man lived. I want you to turn back with me to Mark chapter 5. This story is different than the Messianic secret. Are y'all tracking me so far? Are we good? Okay, so we've got the whole milieu here, the Galilee thing, and then the fact that Jesus has to keep his identity a secret. Let me just kind of read this story, and then we'll see if we can unpack it. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. So I'm on the eastern shore taking this picture. Jesus would have come from here. This is where he would have come. The Sermon on the Mount, all the miracles that you know would have come from here. Now he's on the other side. And when he'd stepped out of the boat, immediately a man of the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. Okay, horror show. Man in the tombs. Okay, that's unclean. You're not supposed to touch dead things. You have to quarantine if you're anywhere near a tomb, and this guy lives there. So it's a scary thing. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him anymore, even with a chain. For he'd often been restrained with shackles and chains, and the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. I have a friend who maintains this park where I'm standing right now, and he believes, and he's an archaeologist and a scientist, that the city up above the tombs, there was a city up above it, and the Gospel of Luke remembers him as a man of the city. that this man was probably a retired Roman soldier who worked as security, because they had those guys living in the walls, and so he was probably a legionnaire and had lost his mind with PTSD. That he's just convinced that this is a description of what happens when you've spent a life murdering and warring, and he's just lost himself. It's a sad, really, really sad story. So when he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him, and he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" And he replied, "My name is Legion, for we're many." That's another reason why my buddy thinks that he was probably a legionnaire. And I also want you to know that in the Galilee, demonic possession was a topic, a familiar topic, because you live next to Greek-speaking Gentile people, and they lived very comfortably in a world of exorcism. Read the Gospels carefully, and I might get caught on this, but I don't think so. Jesus doesn't perform exorcisms in Jerusalem. They don't talk about that stuff down there. And that brings us to what I like to call the principle of particularity. God will speak to you in your world and in your way. You know, if I were to perform an exorcism in front of Taco Mama, for instance, you couldn't get enough people in here on Sunday morning. I mean, you couldn't get a piece of paper between everybody. St. Luke's would be packed because everybody would want to see if I'd do it again, right? Well, the devil knows that, so the devil's not going to, demonically possess anybody in front of Taco Mama. What the devil's going to do is kill us slow with depression or anxiety or low expectations or dead families, right? Or whatever these things that are just bringing us down and driving us apart, and we surface beauty, and then underneath we're just ducks in a pond. We're scrambling and we can't keep up, and we're just dying inside. That's how the devil works. Well, this is also how God works. God breathes new life even into us and into our world and in our way. So in the Galilee, they ascribe everything to demonic possession. I mean, epilepsy, of course, illnesses. I mean, they could give anything at that. And then also demonic possession. If you've ever looked into the eyes of somebody that doesn't have anything on the other side, I mean, I think the spirit world is definitely real, and I think they're dark forces that God protects us from, and we need not touch that hot stove as well. But in this case, I do believe that this is a man who was tormented and thrown away. Okay, verse 10, he begged him earnestly not to send him out in the country. And on the hillside, a great herd of swine was feeding, and the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the swine, let us enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank of the sea and were drowned in the sea. Has anybody thought about why they don't eat pork? You got any thought to it? So another kind of meta story in the Bible. I know we're talking about the Messianic secret, but all this stuff kind of hangs. Another meta story is that in Genesis chapter 12, God asked Abraham to leave a city. This is an account of God's response to the agricultural revolution. 10,000 years ago, human beings just stopped. They built cities, and they were unequal. They only ate one thing. Remember what Jesus said, "Man shall not live by bread alone." Well, they lived by bread alone. And one guy got to be the king, but everybody else had to be the schmuck that, picked the wheat or guarded the wheat or warred over the wheat and had to work for the king. Writing was a new invention, so they would write in Mesopotamia or the Nile. Lots of stories to remind you who was on top. In Egypt, only the king could be divine. Only the king could live forever. I know the Egyptians believe a lot in the afterlife. Well, not you. You're a slave. Only Pharaoh gets to go across the boat and take his animals with him, and this sort of thing, and on and on and on and on until finally Genesis chapter 12, God says, "No, enough. Abraham, leave this and be different. Take care of your children, show the world what it's like to be in relationship with me, and the families of the earth will be blessed through you." I mean, this is really the story of the Bible. It tracks. It's remarkably coherent and scientific. It's not a fairy tale. It's about a way of being different now. And we know that heaven's coming, so we can take that off our worry plates. Rather, the Bible is a way of being a better sort of human being. And so pig bones. Let's go back to pigs. Pigs were the ultimate city food. Ultimate city food. They eat garbage and they have a lot of babies really fast. They weren't clean. It wasn't clean meat. They don't chew their cud. I was explaining to the children's chapel this morning. I taught them. We were talking about the Good Shepherd. And some of you heard me say this at 9. I I said, what do y'all know about sheep? And the little boy said, they're delicious. I said, okay, well, that's a first world answer. Okay, great. I like good lamb at Costco. It's amazing. But no, I said they're revenant animals. They're revenant. Means they chew their cud. And then I explained that. They thought that was the coolest thing ever. Right? You throw it up in your mouth. But pigs don't do that, so the meat's not clean. Got it? In other words, sitting living's not clean living. Sitting living's not clean living. Sitting living's not safe living. So you got all this imagery here of unclean spirits and an unclean animal and all this uncleanness being washed away and drowned at that bank behind me. Verse 14, the swineherds ran off and told it in the city and in the country. The people came to see what had happened. And by the way, it's no mistake these people live in a city because they've thrown this guy away. This is what you do in the city. If you're deficient in some way, then you're not fully human, right? And another way that we're different is that we honor the dignity of every human being, regardless of age, regardless of their abilities or disabilities. So the people came to see what had happened. They came to Jesus and they saw the demoniac sitting there, clothed in his right mind, the very man who had the legion. They were afraid. Those who had seen what had happened to the demoniac and to the swine reported it. Then they began to beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood. And he was getting into the boat. The man who'd been possessed by the demons begged him that he might be with him. But Jesus refused and said, go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, what mercy he has shown you. Do you see the difference here? He tells the leper, back over on the Jewish side in the Galilee, don't tell anybody, don't tell anybody. Of course, he's, but this guy, he goes, no, don't follow me back over there. This is not for you. That's not your world. You go tell your neighbors and friends how much God has shown you. And then he went away and began to proclaim it in the Decapolis, how much Jesus had done for him. 10 trading cities, 10 Greek-speaking Gentile trading cities. He goes and he tells everybody what God has done for him. So instead of a secret, he goes and tells. Why? Well, for starters, he can't do any harm over there. The people living in the Decapolis aren't waiting for the Messiah. They do business with the Romans. Things are hunky-dory in their world. And so this is a different context and a different message in this world. Jesus is safe for him to spread the word in that way. I mean, if you just want to look at it politically and more savvily, you could do that. But it's even better than that. So what happens is Jesus goes off from this scene. And he has some adventures. He goes basically to the coast and does a few things. He feeds 5,000 people. And if you just turn a page to page 819, you see the heading. I don't have to read the story to you. He goes back to this side of the lake and he feeds 4,000 people. Now, the two feeding stories. We know about the feeding of the 5,000, right? That's the feeding of the 5,000 on the Jewish side of the lake. But on the Gentile side of the lake, he comes back and he feeds 4,000. Now, I know I talked a little bit in between the story that I just read to you, but did you catch that Jesus heals this one guy and everybody wants him gone? They want Jesus gone. They've lost their communal swineherd. That's one reason why they want him gone. They also want him gone because they're freaked out because this was a scary guy down in the tombs, and so now he's of his right mind, and Jesus is listening to him. He even wants to be a disciple. They want him gone. They come down. So on the Jewish side of the lake, Jesus is a rock star for the wrong reasons. On the Gentile side of the lake, he's revealed to have real power even over the demons, and they don't even want him around. And yet, only 3 chapters later, he goes back and he feeds 4,000 people on this side of the lake because they've come to hear him preach, which means that the man in the tombs is the greatest salesman the Bible never talks about. That dude could sell, right? Now, it brings me to today and the Messianic secret. I love that answer that came earlier about making God in our image. But if we can somehow be faithful and be humble and not be a projection of our own desires and our own wants and proclaim Jesus as Lord, then we can help do our part to heal our world. And it needs healing. It needs us. It needs us. It needs our courage. It needs our heart. And it needs our witness. Look at what can happen when just one man can go and tell the world what God has done for him. I think that especially for our particular brand of Christian, we don't want to intrude and we don't want to force our religion on anybody. But quite frankly, I think desperate times call for desperate measures. The world needs us. The world needs St. Luke's. And if we know anyone who's hurting or needs a home or needs a harbor or needs a place or needs hope, we must share. We must tell people what we find in our own faith community and bring the lost to this place. We must. And look at what this guy did. I mean, okay, let's compare disciples. He begs to be a disciple, and Jesus says, go home and tell your family what God has done for you. 4,000 people later. How many people did James and John from Capernaum convert? I mean, right before Jesus dies, they're asking which one is the greatest. Okay, so again, the Bible's full of wonderful irony, and I think another one is the messianic secret. And finally, I'm going to land the plane with this scene right here. Go with me to Mark chapter 15. And it's on page 829. If somebody would just make a screenplay based on the Gospels and how they're told and not try to make it into some kind of Hallmark movie, the story itself is better than anything that you could ever watch. This is going to be Mark chapter 15, verse 33. This is the death of Jesus, saddest day on planet Earth, saddest day in history. When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. And at 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, listen, he's calling for Elijah. Remember, they're still kind of hanging on. They don't know what this guy was about. And someone ran and filled a sponge full of sour wine and put it on a stick. And they gave it him to drink, saying, wait, let us see whether Elijah will come and take him down. And then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, which, by the way, is only something God can do, right? Torn from top to bottom. Now, when the centurion who stood facing him saw the way that he breathed his last, he said, truly, this man was God's son. Somebody finally saw. Peter didn't fully see. I'm not sure the demoniac really fully saw, but at the end of the story, before Easter, before the resurrection, it was a Roman soldier who saw it. Truly, this man was God's son. It wasn't a secret anymore. All right, I'm going to turn this off and see if y'all have any questions.